Hello and welcome again to the Roommate Humanities vlog. I'm continuing my long series on the fantasy glossary. First of all, I would like to make a correction. Having not seen the movie Frozen, I was unaware that Anna's name is pronounced Anna and not Anna. That's how little I actually know about this movie. See, it's real. Okay, I'm not making this stuff up. Okay, I'm starting with H, and the first item on my list is Harry Potter. Okay, so Harry Potter is a different hero archetype than Anna. She was sort of like the fool. She has no magical powers. Harry Potter, on the other hand, starts off as a mere mortal, what the author refers to as a muggle, but discovers that he has magical powers over the course of the story. Now, what I really like about Rowling's work here is that Harry Potter doesn't come into all of his powers instantly. For example, in Percy Jackson and Lightning Thief, he comes into pretty much all of his Percy Jackson powers within the first book. Like, he gets his magic sword, he gets his water powers, his water healing, or whatever. But Harry Potter takes, like, years to come into his powers. And in this, it feels more organic than it often does. But, having said that, it is a trope in fantasy for a nobody hero to suddenly come into all of their powers and to suddenly become formidable. And I think Harry Potter does it right. Okay, next up I have Hobbit. Now, hobbits are not a staple of fantasy. I think a lot of authors have tried to make characters like hobbits something like a staple of fantasy, but they just haven't caught on. Elves have caught on, dwarves have caught on in a big way, but not hobbits. But that's okay, because I think in Tolkien's work, I think the hobbit sort of represents this good, honest, rural, British person. And I think that's part of the appeal of the book, is that if you know what it means to be good and honest and rural, you know what it means to be a hobbit. And he can very quickly establish the rules of what it means to be a hobbit through this means. Next on my list, I have Hydra. Likewise, Hydra shows up from time to time in fantasy literature. It's a giant monster, like a wingless dragon, with many, many heads. According to mythology, when you remove a head, the head grows back double. The only way to actually kill the Hydra is to burn the stumps before they grow back. I don't see a lot of Hydras in fantasy. I think it's because the means of destroying them is just so well known that there really isn't a lot of storytelling left. Hydras. Next on my list is imagination, which is a lot of fun to have on a list of fantasy terms. Imagination is the heart and soul of the fantasy genre. The fantasy author has to be able to take the world as we know it and imagine things as they are not. And this sort of imaginative play is the strength of the genre, and to an extent also its weakness, because people who write fantasy come across as just making things up. So I think the best fantasy authors are the ones who are able to take these ideas and put them into real-world terms for us, to compare it to things that we know, to find those universal themes, to take their imagination, in other words, and find practical application for it. I think those are the fantasy authors that really last and persist. It's the fantasy authors who just throw in a bunch of wizards and dragons and whatnot, and barbarians, and expect people to find something there. Next on my list is immortality. Immortality. I mean, I really think this is a holdover from ancient Greece. There's not a lot of storytelling potential there, I'm not going to lie to you. A story, I think, needs to have consequences, and having a character who is incapable of having consequences takes away from the story. You do get immortals in fantasy, but I think they're at their best when they're conditionally immortal. Like Gandalf, he dies and is somehow magically reborn. In Tuck Everlasting, the family is immortal and they can't die, and that's kind of portrayed as a negative thing, that they're stuck or they're trapped in time. So I think you can play with immortality, and that's great, but I wouldn't do it with my protagonist. And I'd try to play up the bad aspect of it if I could. Next up I have illusions. Typically an illusion is a work of magic that is made to fool the senses of another person. Sometimes you get illusions that have a kind of tangibility to them, an ability to touch and manipulate, but I think those are the exception. They are certainly not the rule. And finally today we get to invisible. I think invisible falls into that same camp as things like giant and flying. If you slap the word invisible on something, it becomes very, very powerful. The most famous invisibility is, of course, Bilbo in The Lord of the Rings, how he finds the one ring that makes him invisible, but comes with a heap of drawbacks. Another notable invisible is, of course, the Invisible Man. Um, I will say this before I quit, because I just hit the 5-minute mark. Invisibility. Characters who can become invisible in storytelling are almost always instantly corrupted by this power. Like, they no longer have any accountability to the people around them, and it corrupts them and makes them evil faster than almost anything else. So use it sparingly. Invisibility.